During those meetings, we had a robust conversation about regional and global challenges. That includes Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. I reiterated that we would welcome China playing a constructive role, along with other nations, to work toward a just peace based on the principles of the United Nations Charter. We also spoke about North Korea's increasingly reckless actions and rhetoric. All members of the international community have an interest in encouraging the DPRK to act responsibly, to stop launching missiles, to start engaging on its nuclear program. China is in a unique position to press Pyongyang to engage in dialogue and to end its dangerous behavior. I raised U.S. concerns, shared by a growing number of countries, about the PRC's provocative actions in the Taiwan Strait, as well as in the South and East China Seas. On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances. We do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. We continue to expect the peaceful resolution of cross-strait differences. We remain committed to meeting our responsibilities under the Taiwan Relations Act, including making sure that Taiwan has the ability to defend itself. We also spoke about a range of bilateral issues, including continuing to develop principles to guide our relationship, as discussed by President Biden and President Xi in Bali late last year. We exchanged views on our respective economic policies, including our concerns about China's unfair treatment of U.S. companies. During my meeting today with U.S. business leaders who are operating in China, I heard about the problems that U.S. businesses are facing, including recent punitive actions against American firms. I also heard that U.S. companies want to continue, and indeed grow their businesses here. And so, in my meetings, I sought to clarify any misperceptions or misunderstandings about our approach. There is a profound difference for the United States and for many other countries between de-risking and decoupling. Our countries traded more over the last year, in fact, more than ever over the last year, nearly $700 billion. Healthy and robust economic engagement benefits both the United States and China. And as Secretary Yellen testified before Congress last week, it would be, as she put it, disastrous for us to decouple and stop all trade and investment with China. We are for de-risking and diversifying. That means investing in our own capacities and in secure, resilient supply chains, pushing for level playing fields for our workers and our companies, defending against harmful trade practices, and protecting our critical technologies so that they aren't used against us. I made clear that we'll continue to take targeted actions that are necessary to protect U.S. national security. In my meetings, I also discussed human rights. The United States and the international community remain deeply concerned about PRC human rights violations, including in Xinjiang, in Tibet, in Hong Kong. I also specifically raised wrongfully detained U.S. citizens and those facing exit bans. There is no higher priority for me than the safety and well-being of U.S. citizens overseas, and I'll continue to work intensively to secure their release and their safe return home. As we work to address our differences, the United States is prepared to cooperate with China in areas where we have mutual interests, including climate, macroeconomic stability, public health, food security, counter-narcotics. On food security, we believe China can play a key role in alleviating global food insecurity. I underscored the importance of supporting a long-term expansion of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which has facilitated the export of almost 32 million tons of grain from Ukraine, with approximately 18 million tons going to developing countries. A long-term expansion is critical for avoiding food shortages in some of the poorest, most food-insecure countries in the world, as well as price surges. I raised as a priority the issue of synthetic opioids and fentanyl, a crisis in the United States. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of Americans aged 18 to 49. I made clear that we need much greater cooperation to address this critical issue. We agreed to explore setting up a working group or joint effort so that we can shut off the flow of precursor chemicals which help fuel this crisis and a growing number of deaths. Finally, we discussed the importance of strengthening people-to-people exchanges between students, scholars, business travelers. That benefits our citizens, our economies, and our relationship. Today, I had an opportunity to meet with an impressive group of alumni from those exchange programs. In my meetings, we discussed enhancing educational exchanges, and we committed to work to increase direct flights between our countries. To continue dialogue on these and other important issues, I would expect additional visits by senior U.S. officials to China over the coming weeks. And we welcome further visits by Chinese officials to the United States. To that end, I invited State Counselor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang to visit Washington, and he agreed to come at a mutually suitable time. A little later this evening, I leave for London to attend the Ukraine Recovery Conference, and I'll also have an opportunity there to brief allies and partners on this visit and to continue to strengthen our alignment. We have no illusions about the challenges of managing this relationship. There are many issues on which we profoundly, even vehemently, disagree. We will always take the best course of action to advance the interests of the American people. But the United States has a long history of successfully managing complicated, consequential relationships through diplomacy. It's the responsibility of both countries to find a path forward, and it's in both our interests and the interests of the world that we do so.
We'll take a few questions. The first question goes to Ian Marlowe with Bloomberg.
Thank you, Secretary. China's accused the U.S. of economic containment over the Biden administration's efforts to limit Beijing's access to key technology, including semiconductors, as you mentioned. Are you worried that the future U.S. moves in that area will derail the current efforts to stabilize ties with China and might force the Chinese to take retaliatory measures, perhaps in other areas of the relationship? And after your talks here in China, secondly, what's your impression of the top leadership's stance on Ukraine, whether they are still likely to provide eventually lethal aid to Russia, or are they at all interested in using their influence with Vladimir Putin to bring about a diplomatic solution to the conflict? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. So on the first part of the question, one of the important things for me to do on this trip was to disabuse our Chinese hosts of the notion that we are seeking to economically contain them. We're not. And as I've said, we are not about decoupling. We're about de-risking and diversifying. And here's what I mean by that. First, when it comes to decoupling or economic containment, I think the facts simply belie that proposition. As I mentioned, our trade relationship reached the highest number that it's ever hit last year, about $700 billion in trade. American foreign direct investment in China has reached levels that we haven't seen since 2014. Parenthetically, we've got about 300,000 Chinese students studying in the United States. We have many American companies that I met with, or at least their representatives here, including the Chamber of Commerce, that continue to be very interested to do business here, and it's profoundly in our interest. I also noted to our hosts that China's broad economic success is also in our interest. We have done a remarkable job rebounding from COVID and having a growing economy, very low unemployment, tremendous investments in our future. But we also benefit tremendously when there is growth and progress in other countries, especially one of the world's largest economies when it comes to China. So it simply would not be in our interest to seek to decouple. And as I mentioned, and as you heard Secretary Yellen say to Congress just a few days ago, in fact, it would be disastrous. However, what is clearly in our interest is making sure that certain specific technologies that China may be using to, for example, advance its very opaque nuclear weapons program, to build hypersonic missiles, to use technology that may have repressive purposes, It's not in our interest to provide that technology to China. And I've also made that very clear. So the actions that we're taking, that we've already taken, and as necessary that we'll continue to take, are narrowly focused, carefully tailored to advance and protect our national security. And I think that's a very important distinction. Now, we're also not the only ones doing that. In fact, the phrase of the day, de-risk, not decouple, was actually put forward by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And it reflects very well the approach that many countries are taking, both because of the importance of sustaining economic relations, trade and investment with China, but also because of concerns about some of the things that China is doing with the technology that's getting to them. So I spent some time making sure that we were very clear about what we're doing as well as what we're not doing. With regard to lethal aid to Russia for use in Ukraine, we and other countries have received assurances from China that it is not and will not provide lethal assistance to Russia for use in Ukraine. We appreciate that, and we have not seen any evidence that contradicts that. What we do have ongoing concerns about, though, are Chinese firms, companies, that may be providing technology that Russia can use to advance its aggression in Ukraine. And we have asked the Chinese government to be very vigilant about that.